Dr. Naledi Pandor. So good to have you, Minister. Thank you very, very much for joining us. I believe that you're in Cape Town. Thank you.
Yes, I am. Thank you. And good morning to you and morning to your viewers. Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolute pleasure. And I suppose the best starting point here is to actually talk about a bit of background of the relations between South Africa and Cuba.
Well, South Africa has very strong bonds with Cuba, as with many other countries. Cuba has played a very important role in supporting various struggles for freedom across the world. And as many of your viewers would know, the Cubans continue to suffer under the most harsh sanctions by the United States of America, which has imposed trade, people exchange, and a whole range of sanctions against the people of Cuba. What is interesting about Cuba is that despite this very horrendous set of sanctions, they've always committed themselves to support progressive struggles, freedom struggles throughout the world. Cuban people assisted the people of Vietnam in their war against colonialism and imperialism, led primarily by America and European countries. They also supported the struggle in Southern Africa. So they're a country that really knows the meaning of international solidarity and understand that where human rights are infringed, they will be ready to lend their support and actually even sacrifice in the interests of countries winning freedom. Mm-hmm. So we have an important bond of solidarity, but also we believe that the sanctions against them are totally in offense to the United Nations human rights instruments, and we believe these sanctions should be lifted. President Obama did begin a thawing of the sanctions. He didn't go far enough, but at least tourists were beginning to come to Cuba, which is a major earner of income for their country. But this was paused very harshly by President Trump, who introduced even further sanctions, which have not been lifted by President Biden. So from our part, very strong bonds, but also to understand it's a country that suffers under a terrible weight of sanctions oppression.
And so, I mean, this leads us to now our help and relationship with regard to Cuba. So let's talk. We'll first start off with the issue of this money that has, I suppose, was going to be paid over. I think it was the 50 million rand. And you were earlier quoted as having said that the African Renaissance Fund doesn't actually give money to any beneficiary, but humanitarian aid in a form of food or medical supplies is what's given. So what is the nature of this 50 million rand donation that is currently in dispute?
There's no donation. Our intention is to provide humanitarian aid to Cuba. Cuba wrote to us, as many countries do. We provide humanitarian aid to various countries that are experiencing very difficult times. And South Africa's contribution in world terms is modest. We, as South Africa, get grants in aid ourselves from a range of countries for skills training. Many of our NGOs receive international support from countries across the world, foundations. So this matter of support, of aid, is a worldwide phenomenon, and it's a foreign policy practice that countries have as part of their international relations armor. It's often referred to as soft power, because hard power is often the more aggressive type of foreign relations, either a war or some form of incursion or use of very harsh sanctions. But soft power would be support through scholarships. It may be support for food aid or support for an agricultural project. So Cubans, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, had written to South Africa to say, we're unable to get basic medical supplies, which we need to combat COVID-19. Because of the blockade against us, we can't get these critical medicines. Our people are sick and dying. We're also struggling with food security because of many of the restrictions that we're confronted by. I know that some journalists have said Cuba has no problem of food insecurity, and compared to South Africa, it's very minimal. Well, when a friend writes to you and says, can you assist? If you have the means to do so, you should be able to assist.
Yeah.
And the African Renaissance Fund is a fund dedicated to international cooperation of this kind.
Okay.
But what we have done, and I think it's a very smart approach by South Africa, whenever we agree to provide humanitarian aid, we source through procurement in terms of the law through South African companies. So the beneficiaries are actually our own businesses. We don't give money. So it's not a donation. Someone used that phrase somewhere and it has become popular, but it's a total misinterpretation of the approach that we utilize.
So, Minister, I mean, let's talk about it, because this has really caused a lot of widespread criticism on the country's spending on Cuba. I understand what you're saying. I understand the fact that, you know, if a friend writes to you in need and you're able to, then you do assist. The question, however, is, are we able to? And this leads me to my point of, we are sitting with one of the highest unemployment rates that we have ever had in the country, number one. Number two, there are medical doctors here in South Africa that do not have work, are not getting paid, and yet we bring over 200 Cuban doctors at a cost of, I'm not too sure how much the final amount was, but I mean, at 1.83 million rand here into South Africa, when, as you have just said, they themselves were struggling back home. So we need to understand that more. Then the engineers come to South Africa and they assist here and working in the country when we have engineers that can do these jobs. And yet we are importing Cubans to come into South Africa and do the work that qualified South Africans can do. It is very difficult pill to swallow for South Africans. Surely you can understand that.
Well, I can respond in terms of my own portfolio, which is with respect to the humanitarian aid that we had we intend to provide. As I say, this is part and parcel of the policy practice that we have in the international relations domain. We cannot, as South Africans, expect that our program on HIV/AIDS, where we provide huge support in terms of access to antiretrovirals and other treatments, we can't expect that the Global Fund of the United States would fund us hugely in the millions of dollars. But when help is needed in a country that is struggling, we are not ready to give assistance. We cannot expect that we would have support from Germany to support our vocational training and the development of our vocational colleges. And we are not ready to make some funds available to support funds that are set aside and dedicated for that purpose. Now, I was intrigued. I listened to a discussion you and Sakina had at the close of a program sometime last week. And the discussion was suggesting that we're taking away funding from social development, because if we use this fund to give poor people food in South Africa, then we'd be doing the right thing. As the viewers would know, when Parliament allocates a budget, the budget is allocated to a specific department for specific purposes, which are often set out in legislation that governs the policy action of that department. The funds of the ARF are set out for the objects of the act that created the African Renaissance Fund. And part of that act has as its goals humanitarian support in Africa and internationally. So we are pursuing the correct policy position, while also Social Development Department is provided by Parliament, appropriated billions of rands to provide support that would assist poor people in our country. So this is not money that is taken away from someone who requires assistance with food security in our country. It would not be available for that purpose. So there was a clear misunderstanding of how the country allocates fundings and how the appropriation process is carried through in Parliament.
But surely
I saw that even in court, there was this argument that this humanitarian aid takes away from South Africans, but those funds are not for utilization to support initiatives in South Africa. We have dedicated budgets that are for that. I then would want to really encourage that the SABC and particularly Morning Live should invite ministers in the portfolios referred to so that they could explain to you the value we have derived from the readiness of Cuban doctors, for example, to work in rural areas in our country. I am often, really worried that we don't go down to the detail of what is being done with a particular set of projects or actions.
Yeah.
We have been really seeing fantastic support in terms of primary health care support in many rural areas of our country provided by doctors from Cuba.
Yeah.
We've also benefited from science and mathematics teachers from Cuba. So often we are addressing areas that are a critical skills gap in our country. But I don't want to speak for the ministers of health or water and sanitation. I think it'd be great if you invite them, and then they can actually elaborate on the particular initiatives that you referred to.
Indeed, and we would.
I do believe it's correct.
I think
that we provide humanitarian support to Cuba.
And that is your view, and you've given us all the background to it, and I suppose it is good and proper to understand how the processes do work. And I mean, because I know that the whole basis of AfriForum actually going and taking you to court was because they were saying that no mandatory parliamentary overview was conducted over this donation, and that's the reality, and that National Treasury didn't approve it. But you're saying this is coming from your department's budget. It has nothing to do with getting approval. So I understand your side, but
I think there was an overreach because we haven't even activated the process. So just a rumor and this idea that was carried in the public domain that there's a package with 50 million rand in it and it's being transferred to Cuba. This is absolutely ridiculous.
Okay.
And I've been really shocked at the manner in which we've had misinformation.
You're going to court on review?
Absolutely.
What date will this be?
Don't know as yet, but certainly that's the direction.
Okay. So, Minister, surely this can't be seen in isolation, though. I mean, when you're sitting and you're talking about this, and I absolutely understand what you're saying. There is a way that, South Africa-Cuban relations are massive. The history goes back a very, very long time. And when there is a country that's in dire need, and we are able to assist in a way through what you have in your budget, it's good. But surely you don't sit alone and make these decisions. At the same time, you look at what your other departments are doing. Bills of 359 million rand for training in Cuba. Again, I bring up the issues of the engineers, the doctors, all of these things where money is constantly coming out of South Africa and away from South Africans who are desperate. And you know that, Minister. South Africans are desperate and they're angry when they hear stories like that. So surely a decision like this needs to incorporate read the room, feel the room, know that South Africans will get upset.
This is why, as I said, when we implement, we don't purchase in Cuba or anywhere, we purchase from South African businesses. So the aid that will go that 50 million will be utilized, spent in South Africa. So, and we have to have a proper agreement between the two countries, which would then be presented to Parliament. So there's a whole process. And this notion, as I said, that there's a box of 50 million and we're just posting it across the oceans. This is what has been propelled and carried through in the media to create an impression of irresponsibility. We're not irresponsible, and nor are we seeking to waste the country's money, nor deny the people of South Africa their correct development support, which must be provided by our country. I've even had some of these groups send me a pot and say, here's a pot for you to cook for South Africans with that 50 million. I mean, I've got all sorts of abuse because of this, but the intention is not in any way to detract from the responsibility our government has, which is absolutely a correct one toward the people. After all, we are their government and their representatives. And it is for this reason that more than 53% of the national revenue of South Africa, our budget, is directed toward the social wage in our country, toward support for our people. So this attempt to create an impression that you have a government that doesn't care, when we know that we have the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, which assists students who come from poor families, when we know that women who are expectant and poor can access public health care without having to pay any money toward that care, when we know that we have free schooling in over 80% of the public schools in our country. So we know what is being done in terms of development support. And we are fortunate as a country that our people have agreed that our budget, the majority of it, should be directed towards social support. This is very important, while also working toward ensuring that more and more of the people of South Africa certainly have jobs and also enterprises that they run. And really, congratulations to the thousands of young people who are starting their own businesses. I've been extremely encouraged about what the future of our country looks like. So the dismal attempt to create a negative impression about our intention of humanitarian aid to Cuba is really falling on very flat ground.
Minister, I think, and we're about to wrap, so I've got literally about a minute and a half with you. I understand, and it is, and I've said this before, you know, we just have to understand the desperation that South Africans are living in right now, that they wake up in the morning, they are hungry, there is no running water, the roads are falling apart, the electricity system is something that is, it's not working properly, it's not serving South Africans' best interests. We're coming out of a pandemic that has seen our growth rate tumble. We're seeing fuel prices going up. We're seeing the cost of living in terms of paying for electricity and food going up. People can't afford basic food stuff. And Minister, I understand. Sorry, just to finish.
I'd be able to match your list.
Just to finish what I'm saying, because I know we know the positives, Minister. We know what you're doing, but there's still a lot of difficulties, and you can't blame South Africans for feeling that they are upset, especially when we talk of corruption within the government. And this is what people are worried about. And you know this. I don't need to talk to you about this.
Well,
so that's the anger in South Africans.
And I agree with South Africans, because we must be angry at corruption. It's absolutely disgusting theft. I myself am disgusted by it, as I said in Parliament just 2 days ago. So absolutely agree. And of course, the suffering is something deeply regretted. And we're working hard to overcome it, to ensure that we do, as government, provide solutions. I was really thrilled yesterday to be attending a science graduation at the University of Cape Town, and to note that the majority of graduates are young Black women. So this, for me, is a major advance. So indeed, the cup is not full yet. It might not even be half full. but there are positive elements. So the choice would be we can consistently focus on that which is negative and create a sense of pessimism and an inability to change our condition, or we can actually look at the optimistic side where progress is being made incredibly. So I believe South Africa is a great nation, and I believe the people of South Africa have immense capability, and that they will show the world that we can be one of the countries in the leading ranks of the world. So this is my view of the people of South Africa, without detracting from the terrible suffering that you have referred to. My own approach has been throughout that I look to what is it that would make the difference, and I try to work hard at that.
Minister, we appreciate your time. Thank you very, very much. We know that that will be going back to the courts, the whole issue, and we thank you for bringing us your views, your perspectives, and the story behind this donation to Cuba, and not in a monetary value, but in humanitarian assistance. So we'll see what the courts say about that. Naledi Pandor, our Minister of International Relations. Minister, before I let you go, my apologies, I'm going to run into the news at 8, and it is one of our news stories. Perhaps an update. Remember our President Cyril Ramaphosa had offered mediation and assistance with regard to Russia and Ukraine. Is there any update on that that you perhaps want to share with us?
Well, I'm aware. I was in Turkey recently, and I met with the foreign minister, and I know President Erdogan is working very closely with both Russia and Ukraine. Both foreign ministers were in Turkey when I was there, and I was informed that there will be the negotiations that all of us are observing now, where President Erdogan, the president of Turkey, is playing a leading role. It would appear that some progress is being made. We continue to speak to the presidents of both countries, and our president speaks as well to his peers in the BRICS partnership and to African presidents. So we are linked in to the process, and I get regular reports from our ambassadors in the region as to how the negotiations are proceeding.
Minister, thank you. Thanks very much again for your time and for the update here on Morning Live.